So I want to compare the 1984 Dan Marino to the 2013 Peyton Manning to see who had a more prolific season. If we just look at the stats, Peyton Manning had more yards than Dan Marino, and Peyton Manning had more touchdowns than Dan Marino. And Dan Marino also had more interceptions, but I'm a Dan Marino fan, so I'm just going to leave that out and create some bias in this. So we can use the Z-score to give us an idea of who had a better season. Now I'm going to hit equals. I'm going to average, and we're going to find what the average was for the passing yards. In 1984, it was 2,839 for the top 28 quarterbacks. I selected the top 28 quarterbacks because that was the top how many teams there were in the NFL at that time. Both seasons there was 16 games, so we don't have to adjust for that. And then the average for the passing yards, I left one off there. So if I need to go back and fix it, I'm off one spot, and it kind of gives me a little warning there. So what I can do is I can go back in here and change the 32 to a 33, and it fixes it. So we can do a quick comparison, but not average, silly. We can just take the average passing yards and subtract them, and we find out that in 2013, the average starting quarterback or top quarterback passed for almost 550 yards more for the season. And if we divide that by 16, that would mean there's about 34 more yards per game of passing per player, or rather per quarterback. Now we're going to find the standard deviation, STDP here. I'm going to use the population because this is all the quarterbacks. And if I did that again, I'm going to change that out. We're doing yards right now, so let me do that again. I keep on going to touchdowns for some reason. So we'll go to the population for the yards. And whoever had the largest positive Z-score, we can make an argument had a better season. And I really don't know what the answer is going to be for this. So I'm going to hit equals. And our formula is right there. We got the X, which is Dan Marino's score. I need to put that in parentheses. Minus the average. His passing yard average is right here. And then we're going to divide. So let's close the parentheses. Hit the slash key for division. And then we're going to put the standard deviation, which is 910.762. Now you could type those numbers in, but one thing we don't want to do right now is double click and drag this down. One, because what's happening is the Excel's not taking the right numbers. We want Excel to be locked into M8, so I'm going to put a money sign right there in the middle between the number and the letter, and that's going to lock it in. So now I can either click and drag, or if I click in the cell, I can, the bottom right corner, notice how the plus sign changes. If I double click, it goes all the way down the list. Now that Z-score is 2.46. That's really high. That's a lot of standard deviations away, although not necessarily an outlier. So we want that to be above 3, or really less than -3. When we scroll down the list, nobody was a negative outlier for that category. And now for Peyton Manning, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to equals my left parentheses. I'm going to click on his score. We're going to subtract it from the yards average for 2013. We'll put the money sign in there. Lock it in. Close the parentheses. Then divided by the deviation, which was 995.696 for that year. And we'll put the money sign in between it. And here's my answer. Oh, right now Dan Marino has a better Z-score than Peyton Manning. So that would favor Peyton Manning or Dan Marino for the passing yards. Now we're going to look at the touchdowns. Same idea. So we'll start with the average. So equals average. And we're going to go straight down the list for touchdowns. And we'll do the same thing for 2013. And then we're going to find the standard deviation for each. Now, interesting enough, and this will be std ev.p for population, because I'm going to use all of them. interesting enough, there was about what does it look like 4 more passing touchdowns per quarterback for the season in 2013. And we found the standard deviation for both. Now we're going to find the z-score. So we'll see the final answer here. So we'll put in the equals left parentheses. I'm going to click on Dan Marino's score minus his average, or minus the average 1984, divided by the standard deviation for 1984, and then we're going to put the money signs in there to lock it in. So Excel goes down the list. Wow, that's an outlier right there, 3.473. That is an outlier for sure. And then we're going to do the same thing for Peyton Manning. So equals left parentheses. Let's go with the touchdowns. That's the X minus the average. Put the money sign in there. Try to close the parentheses. Divide by the standard deviation. Put the money sign in there. So we got, wow, 3.41 for him as well. That's also off an outlier. So both of them were clear outliers for passing touchdowns that season. And both categories slightly favor Dan Marino a little bit. So if I just looked at this data, it would show that Dan Marino had a more prolific season in relative to the other NFL starting quarterbacks than Peyton Manning did in 2013. But there's a whole bunch of other factors we could look at, but we're not going to. I'm not going to look at interceptions because I don't want that to ruin my story, because it looks like Peyton Manning was very low for a starting quarterback that year.